Welcome to High Notes, conversations on the art and business of voice. High Notes. Make sure you never miss a video on our channel by pressing that subscribe button, and if you like this episode, please do give it a like and leave us a comment below. Now, let's meet this month's guest. Today we're joined by Dr Rockford Sansom, renowned voice coach, author and expert in helping leaders, performers and professionals find their voice. In this conversation, we'll explore what it really means to have presence, how to overcome nerves, and why simplicity is the ultimate sophistication when it comes to communication. You'll hear practical advice on making your voice heard, building confidence, and navigating the unique challenges of speaking up in high-stakes environments, whether you're in the boardroom, on stage, or leading a team. If you've ever wondered how to connect with your audience, embrace your individuality, or make a lasting impact with your words, you're in the right place.
Hello, Rocky.
Hello.
Thank you so much for talking to us today. We are talking about voice for business in this series. Now, you have worked with so many individuals, from TED speakers to UN delegates to stage actors. What for you is the common thread when it comes to voice and presence, regardless of profession?
That's a marvelous question. Leonardo da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And I find that true just across all different kinds of communicators, actors, speakers, politicians, people of business. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Now, what I also find is really interesting is that across the board, everybody has butterflies. Everybody has a sense of nervousness or that little flutter. I personally stay away from the word anxiety in my coaching because that's a clinical term. So I like the word butterflies. It's completely there, even people at the highest levels. One of the things I find so interesting that kind of comes from that is this sense of presence, and people define that in lots of different ways. Here's the really simple way that I try to define presence. It's relax what needs to be relaxed and engage what needs to be engaged. Relax what needs to be relaxed and engage what needs to be engaged. And I find that's true of all different kinds of speakers, performers. If your body is really scrunched, like you got to relax that. But if you're just a pile of goo, you're also not particularly interesting. And so it's finding that wonderful balance.
Such a brilliant answer. And I cannot believe straight in you're in with Leonardo da Vinci. I just love it. We were sat around the dinner table yesterday and we were having a discussion. Who would you invite to your dream dinner party? And I was like, Leonardo da Vinci is my top one, right?
There you go,
so
right?
I think you must be a little bit psychic. Here at BRAVA, we talk so much about helping people find their true voice. How do you define that idea? And what do you feel helps someone uncover it?
Absolutely. I'm going to give you my answer, but then let me unpack it. So I always say your true voice in the boardroom, your true voice on stage is your true voice in the bathroom. Your true voice in the bathroom. And what I mean by that is I see you shaking your head, right? I got to unpack it. What I mean by is, if we're all really honest, right? Let's say we have a speech or a big presentation, or if you're an actor and you're working on some copy, that you're going to do it in front of the mirror in the bathroom, and you are magnificent. Like, it's absolutely marvelous, right? You're relaxed, you're cool, you're there, you got the pinginess of the tiles, so you sound really lovely. It's about taking that relaxed, engaged, having kind of fun and silly attitude person and translating that into the more high stress, high stakes place. You know, whatever you're doing, how can you be that person? There's other layers to it too. If you're like me, I had this most wonderful, charming high school public speaking teacher, and I'm still in touch with her, and I think the world of her. And she said, "Know your audience," and that's kind of a cliched term you hear all the time, like know your audience, and no offense to anyone or anything who says that, but what I found is that that's kind of vague, and no one really tells you what that means. What I have found is it's know what your audience values. That's actually what people mean by that. Know what your audience values. And that is how you can start to tap into who you are and who they are and how you can connect. There's a beautiful book called Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? Why should anyone be led by you? And they have a great quote that says, be yourself more and with skill. Be yourself more and with skill. So finding your true voice, you still can be yourself. It's you, right? You don't have to be anybody else. But more is this sense of, all right, well, we all have different levels. The me in a podcast right now, the me coaching is different than Friday night when I'm eating a frozen pizza after my toddler goes to bed and we're watching Netflix, my wife and I on the couch. Like, that's a different version of me, right? And so it's, how do you tap into that, but skillfully? And I think that is that true sense of your voice in the boardroom, your voice in these more high pressure scenarios is, how do I still be me, but how do I be skillful?
Yeah, a couple of things I want to pick on there. When you started that quote, I wanted to jump in straight away with "Be yourself, everyone else is taken," which is from Oscar
I
Wilde.
love that.
Right?
Yes. Oh, good old Oscar.
I love a bit of Oscar Wilde. And listening to you talk through that, I think there's something about strength of character and not letting nerves take you over and not letting that feeling of being looked at, that fight or flight response almost that comes from that, change who you are. Because actually, retaining that character in a boardroom is about ease and being effortless and sticking to the point. Right. I think that's something that's quite key as well. So there are so many buzzwords when we talk about voice for business, impact and influence. Many of our clients want to increase their impact and influence when they speak. But I want to know, what are the most effective vocal tools for doing that without sounding too artificial or performancy?
So we talk about this a lot, clients and I. So this gets into the concept of breath. And breath is one of those words that lots of people have different definitions for. They use the same term, but there's lots of different definitions. It's just like influence, impact, presence, all those terms. So often it's how you define them that's key. So with breath, so much of it to me is really connected to this idea of relaxing and just being that like in the bathroom self that I was being silly about, right? But what can happen with this big emphasis on breath is that, in my opinion, and there's some really strong research that suggests this, is that people overtank. What will happen is well, I gotta have really good breath. Like the voice teacher told me to have good breath, right? So they'll take this huge kind of mondo breath, and then what happens is a they either have tension, or B, they're in the sort of like fake self. They're like, hey everybody, or they start to be cheesy. When you're just talking to people, you're breathing, you're alive, you're fine, it's all good, right? You don't have to make these giant mondo air things happen. So often when I see people that are kind of performancy or fakey, that's one of the first places we'll start, is like, chill out, friend, right? Like, breath is good, let's work on that, but you're over tanking. Another way to kind of go into that from a vocal tools exercise is tell stories. Like, tell stories. Human beings were hardwired for stories. So much of business communication is given in list form. So on the deck, on the PowerPoint, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. That's not how people talk. People talk in stories. People want to share ideas. So the more you can kind of move things to stories, the better. That's why TED Talks have taken off, because they're so encouraged. The speakers, both in the style and the presentation mode, are to tell stories which people really connect with. And another tip that I think is really helpful is to find kind of your ideal person in your head that you're talking to. So mine is my dad. My dad is this really great guy. He's very educated. He's very smart, but he's just a regular guy. And for the record, I've asked him if I could use him as an example, and he says it's fine. Right? And so he coached American football. He was a sports teacher in high school. Smart, great guy, but just a regular, normal guy. And he takes great pride in that. And so when I'm trying to talk to people, so often I envision my dad. It's not about trying to speak to fancy people or to speak to whomever. Just talk to my dad. And so often that really helps. I would say that the number one thread that runs through kind of all communication is being comfortable being seen. being comfortable being seen. There's a lot of kind of old school voice exercises, even from the 18th, 19th century, and certainly today with various voice teachers that just have you kind of stand in front of people and they look at you, right? Which is very disconcerting at first, but it's actually kind of a really lovely voice exercise is, am I comfortable being seen? Am I comfortable having people look at me? Which is a skill in and of itself. So JFK, the famous American president in the mid 20th century, so the story goes, is he was really great at working a room. Put him in a hotel conference room, ask him to raise millions of dollars, going from like cocktail party group to cocktail party group. Brilliant. But so they say he was extremely nervous talking to people, even though interestingly he was so good at it. But throughout the entirety of his life, so it's said, is he was very, very nervous. And he had a mantra that I thought was just lovely and beautiful. Before he would get up to speak in any kind of formal occasion, he would say to himself, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here with you. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here with you. And I think from a theater perspective, from a boardroom perspective, like that's what really great actors do, and that's what really great speakers do, is they have this sense of, right, I'm comfortable being here, I'm glad to be here, and I'm happy right now to be here with you.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think what that speaks to me of is being comfortable enough to realize it's not about you, not obsessing about yourself or your voice or how you look, because honestly, nobody really cares about that. The idea is to be interested in the people that you're talking to and be curious about them. So that's really good advice. Interesting you bring up presidents because I have heard that Bill Clinton is mesmerizing. Apparently, he can charm anybody. Have you heard the same thing?
I have. I'll actually show Bill Clinton clips from time to time because he's so good at it. He's really good at what we call group rapport. This idea that what do people value, right? What does the audience value? He's really great at tapping into that and showing how he connects with it, how he connects with other people. So one of the famous things he'll do, and I haven't seen him speak in quite some time, but what he did for many, many, many years is he would always make a McDonald's joke at the top of almost every speech. If one was around in the 90s and paid attention to Bill Clinton, he famously each morning would jog to McDonald's with the Secret Service agents, and you could never do this today, but it was kind of charming and hilarious in the 90s that he would jog to McDonald's, and so that became kind of his shtick. Everybody kind of knew him as the McDonald's president. And so he leaned into it. And wherever he would go, whatever country, whatever area, he would kind of make a point to talk about their McDonald's and sort of what was there. And it really connects with and resonates with people to know, oh, he's interested in me. I eat at McDonald's too, and you're Bill Clinton, right? So it's beautiful group rapport.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go too deep into the political situation, but what are your views on the current president who clearly chimes with an awful lot of people in his leadership style?
Sure. So that is its own thing. So that's not a dig, that's just the truth. So he resonates with a lot of kind of bluntness and a lot of ways to connect with people that they feel seen and that they feel heard, and how he does that and the extent to which he does that and the implications of that are very complicated and very sticky, but I think it is objectively true that many, many people feel seen when he speaks.
What's interesting to me is that he is a performer and understands a soundbite. We're living in an age where it's all about extraction. It's not even about listening to a whole speech anymore. And that's something that he is incredibly good at.
That's exceedingly true, yes. So the complex things require complex answers, period. But I do think it's fair to say that Trump is very, very good at giving very simple answers to very complex things. And that has its benefits in many ways politically, and I think has its challenges in terms of actualizing those ideas. But he is nevertheless very good at that.
So let's talk a little bit more about voice actors. How can we use our skills to show up more confidently as ourselves in professional settings like pitches or meetings or networking? Because we're very used to playing characters.
One of the things I do with leaders I think is also very helpful for people who are translating their performance skills into more, dare I say, real life situations. It is I work through a variety of questions with leaders. So let's say someone is a really brilliant software developer, and now they find that they're the chief technology officer of a firm, and that they have to present and talk and kind of be themselves, where they're used to able to kind of just be their work, their product, right? So a similar kind of metaphor with actors. There's a really common theme in leadership training, the three big questions. So who am I? Who are we? And where is my leadership taking us? Who am I? Who are we? And where is my leadership taking us? And so often I think in these kind of real life professional settings, we don't stop and think those are really big questions, right? Like, who am I in this scenario? Again, it's not about being fake or being someone you're not, but what do I want to accomplish? Why am I here? Who are we? What do we value? I also think that in terms of a really kind of tangible skill, I think that playing into finding important keywords when speaking can really be something that people can hold on to. This is something that actors and voice actors are oftentimes very good at, finding your quote unquote operative words or your keywords. And I find that when translating those into real life situations, do the exact same thing. Really good speakers, really good communicators find their keywords, just like I did right there, right? And so leaning into that, I think, gives people a really tangible thing to hold on to while they're communicating.
What's the biggest myth people believe about public speaking or presenting that you would really like to dispel?
That if you do it enough, you won't get nervous. And so that is the biggest myth. So if you do it enough, you won't get nervous. And I can tell you, having from personal experience myself and working with top leaders, they still get nervous. What I tell people is, getting nervous means you care. The other kind of joke I say is, people that say they don't get nervous when public speaking are either liars or sociopaths. And so there's a modicum of truth in that, I think. And so everybody gets a little nervous. It's okay. There's a great quote that says, it's not about getting rid of the butterflies, it's about having the butterflies fly in formation. It's what you do with those butterflies, right? The other myth is getting rid of ums. So the fancy word to impress all of your friends at parties or what are called hesitation sounds. It's right? So that is just a part of the human experience. And even the really best, greatest speakers are going to have those because you're speaking in real time as opposed to on a script. Ideally, it's about reducing those and having them not being distracting, but just having them in life is called being a human. And so that's one thing I try to de-emphasize those for a lot of people. Like, listen, you're fine. It's called being a human.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think the issue comes when the becomes more prevalent in your speech than the rest of the words, right? So because then if you can keep saying all the time, then that's what we kind of latch on to. So I completely agree with you. I think it's okay to to sprinkle your conversation with real life filler words. However, what do you feel about the excessive use of the word light?
Yes. So there's a lot written about that. It's linguists call it an intensifier word.
Yes.
So what's happening with like, and it's something, so at my age, my kind of generationally is there. You'll hear me say that too. And I'm not the youngest person in the room often. And so it's built into the fabric of many kind of Western cultures, and it's trying at a linguistic level to show you what's important. So it's like the most amazing thing, right? The like precedes what, like, this is the most amazing thing in the world. Again, it's not about quote unquote getting rid of it. It's not the devil in speech. It's just it exists. But what can happen is people will use it as a way to create a new filler word. Another big one is so or well. Right? So, well, like, and they'll use it as a way to try to like find their words. And so there it's about breathing, allowing yourself to pause, allowing yourself to find the word, as opposed to using those as that crutch. So it's not about getting rid of the word per se, but it's not allowing it to kind of take over.
And the recognition that when you coach, when you work with a voice coach on your speech and communication, there are ways to enjoy the moments of silence. I personally do believe in the power of the pause. I've seen a few people online on TikTok recently saying, don't worry about the pauses. And I'm there going, what?
Oh
No, what are you
no.
talking about? Absolutely no. The pause. Oh, it said an Did you hear that? And then I just said an I'm saying them
It's
all
all good.
now.
It's all good.
Like, I tell you what's really interesting though, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I have started to see certain generations are using the word like in their written emails. That's fascinating. And I'm not saying that is right or wrong at all. I'm just saying that's fascinating when it starts to become used in the written form.
Yeah, language evolves, and so that's one that's probably not going away. I was reading something the other day that kind of theorized that like will in many ways become like the word very. Well, it's like amazing. Well, it's very amazing. And 50, 100 years from now, we won't really be fazed by it. The word awful was considered awful in the mid 19th century. It was just this awful slang to use it. Now no one flinches, right? So
Awful or off, awful or awful.
so the way I say it,
So we're not talking about awful, we're talking about awful.
oh,
Terrible.
awful. Yes, terrible. Yes. That's my American Southern accent coming out
I
for
thought
you.
it was, but I was like, we're definitely not talking about awful here.
No, 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 no. And it took me as an American, I was like, what is she talking? Oh, that's right. Because we don't really engage in that much.
Okay. I just think it's so fascinating how language evolves. There's an amazing podcast. I don't know if you've heard it, but I think it's called The History of the English Language or something. And it's actually presented by an American. Oh my goodness. It is so dense. I've listened to the first 5 episodes about 10 times each. It is so fascinating. So we'll include that in the links. Okay. I want to talk about your work as an author. You literally wrote the book on the history of voice pedagogy. First of all, can you just tell us what voice pedagogy actually is?
Sure. Voice pedagogy is teaching voice. So, and that can be interpreted in a couple different ways. So, for singing, it's teaching people how to sing. For the public speaking, it's being a communication coach. Within a lot of UK and American history, it was connected to this idea of elocution and diction and trying to quote unquote better oneself through speech. So that nowadays it's used as an actor coach or a voice actor coach or a film coach or a dialect coach. So the term voice pedagogy is trying to kind of encompass sort of all that.
Okay. And within this field, talk to me about one old school idea that still stands strong and one that needs to be left behind.
So the one that still stands strong is the good old Cork exercise. And this is one folks might have seen. It was featured in the King's Speech, the movie with Colin Firth. You take a wine cork and you put it in your mouth and you speak with the wine cork in your mouth. So hello everyone, how are you doing today? The wine cork, hello everyone, how are you doing today? And what this does is it makes you really engage the muscles of your lips and jaw. And and then you take the cork away and then you say it again. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? With the same kind of lip and jaw engagement. And that kind of muscularity, that kind of energy still resonates today. Arguably, it's needed even more so with the use of technology and microphones, right? So that's an oldie but a goodie that lives and survives. The one that should be left away is this idea that there's one quote unquote right way to speak. And I do think that by and large in the 21st century where we find ourselves, that's becoming true. And I think that's great and beautiful and lovely. But certainly for long periods of time in both British and American cultures, for sure, there was this kind of ideal. And it was defined differently by different people and different groups and over time. But like to be a person of influence, to be a person who's quote unquote educated, you're supposed to speak in this particular way. And I do think it's fair to say there's remnants of that within our cultures today. It's a little more covert than it was, say, in the 19th century. But that should absolutely be dispelled, that there's one quote unquote right way to speak.
I think we've made giant strides in that in many ways. And then as a voice actor, when I book work, they'll be like, we just want your British RP, please. It's like, oh, okay then,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah,
We
yeah.
haven't actually moved
Yeah,
that far ahead.
yeah, we always hear, well, I want your general American accent. Well, I don't know where general America is. Could you point to that on a map,
But that's
please?
what we call it. That's what we
Yeah, I
call
know you
it.
do. But
Don't even,
you have to kind of unpack it. Like, well, what do you mean by that, right?
yeah, and I mean, don't even get me started on Mid-Atlantic, right?
Oh gosh in heaven. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But that's a different podcast
That's a different
episode.
podcast.
Yeah,
We could talk for an
exactly.
hour and a half on that. Yeah.
I want to pick up on the wine cork thing as a practitioner myself, because the wine cork idea works really well if it's my own wine cork that I have extracted from my own bottle. The problem I have is if I'm working in a workshop or leading a workshop, I would certainly struggle with producing a ton of wine corks and asking people to put those in their
Yeah.
mouths. So how do you deal with that as a voice coach?
Sure. Come with a bunch of Purell and have people like clean their hands and stick 2 fingers in your mouth. And sticking the 2 fingers in your mouth will help. Now that some people aren't capable of that, it freaks them out. They don't want to do that. And so if that's the case, just hold 2 fingers to your mouth and pretend. Because it's really not about the cork. Like ultimately what you're trying to get people to do is just to really like muscularly engage. That's the whole point. And so as long as the cork is kind of a cheap trick, honestly. And so it's about trying to get people there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for putting my mind at ease. I'm really fascinated by the intersection of voice science and artistry. And all I can say is I have only dipped my toe into that. As you well know, you are much more deeply ensconced in that world. How do you strike that balance in your coaching?
I think voice science can be so helpful as a coach because it allows me to, in a non-clinical medical sense, it allows me to kind of diagnose people. So what am I hearing, right? So acoustically, like what's going on? Now, generally speaking, I don't really share the details of that with people I'm coaching, unless I get the spidey sense that they're a big science nerd like me and they might enjoy that to a certain extent. But most of the time, I can hear something and it lets me kind of quickly like pinpoint something. So I think as a coach that's useful. I think as an actor, a performer, speaker, I think it's helpful to have a general sense of just what's going on in there. Whether if you're a public speaker, if you are someone who talks a lot in meetings, if you're an actor, you're what's called a singer, you're what's called a professional user of voice. So that's a formal term within speech therapy, speech pathology. And so if one is a professional user of voice, I think it's probably a good idea to know a little bit about what's under the hood of the car, so to speak. But at the same time, you don't have to rebuild the engine to extend the metaphor, right?
I love I love your use of metaphor. I
Thank
really
you.
do.
I try. And so you just need to drive the car really well, right? So because you're a user of voice, you don't got to rebuild the transmission, but knowing what a transmission is maybe isn't a bad idea, right? And so it's about kind of like playing that balance. And as a sort of a coda to that, Catherine Fitzmaurice, who was a teacher of mine, a really influential coach, one of her famous sayings is "Coach what's in front of you," which I love that. And I have to give her credit because it's just a beautiful quote. Coach what's in front of you. And so if you kind of come at people with different kinds of terms and really specific things that it's not going to meet their need, then you're not serving them.
Yeah, that's going into some therapy speak there as well, I believe, which a
Yeah.
lot of this work actually is. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Analyze me from a voice science point of view.
So whenever you're a coach, I ask the client, what's your goal? So or so I'll say that. Do you want me just to tell you some things I notice when you talk?
Yes, please do.
Sure.
Go for it. And you can let rip, all right? I can take it, by the
Oh,
way. So you
you
can
have a
go any
lovely
which
voice.
way.
Yeah, every Joe Estel's a famous voice teacher. She said everyone has a beautiful voice. And so which I completely believe that that's true as well. One of the things I've done in my life is to connect with the Estel community. So speaking of Joe, I have a certification with them. So I'll use some Estel terms. So you'd by and large speak with thick and thin folds, which is wonderful and good when performing. So I don't hear a lot of what are called stiff folds or breathy folds. Hi, how are you doing? Happy birthday, Mr. President. I don't hear a lot of that. I also don't hear a lot of, it's either called slack or creaky or vocal fry, which we could spend 20 minutes talking about that and kind of what that means. And for the record, it's not bad to do that on certain occasions, and we all do it as humans, but I don't really hear a lot of that from you. So the fact that you are pretty much thick and fold says to me that you probably had a lot of voice training, or maybe you do it for a living.
That's a really good guess.
I know. Well, I know that anyway, of course. But if I were just to find someone in the wild that did that, I go, they probably speak a lot for a living, because it's what enables you to speak for hours and hours upon time, right? You also, to me, have a fair bit of what's called thyroid tilt. And so you have a thyroid cartilage and you have a thyroid gland. So people talk about their thyroid acting up, they tend to be referring to the gland. But the thyroid cartilage is the shield of the voice. It's the front of your throat, right? And this can tilt. It can be vertical or it can be tilted. When the thyroid's tilted, it thins the folds and it tends to add a quote unquote sweetness to the voice. And so you tend to talk a lot with a lot of thyroid tilt. I do as well. And you tend to speak with a high velum, so which means that you don't have a lot of nasality to your tone.
Thank you. I shall share that with my husband and say to him, my voice is full of sweetness. Come on. He'll be like, okay.
Okay.
But,
Yeah.
for our listener, that just gives you some indication of how much Rocky knows about the voice. It is this idea of being a voice coach. It's very intensive in the work that Rocky does, and the science will blow your mind. And I think, when people want to work on improving their voice, you have to find the right fit. You have to find the right coach, right? And someone like yourself or Kerry Obert, or, the level of knowledge is utterly insane. I mean, it always blows my mind how much you guys know. So I just thought it'd be interesting for our listeners to hear how you would analyze my voice from the science point of view. So that was fascinating. Thank you. And I agree with everything that you said.
Especially the sweetness bit.
Especially the sweetness bit. Okay, so you co-authored the second edition of Voice Work with Christina Schewel, and I was lucky enough to work with her as well, and yourself recently. How has the conversation around changing voices evolved in recent years?
Sure. The evolution of how to work with changing voices, I think, has evolved along with the science around what we know. And also it's changed in terms of how we embrace and use science. So the singing world arguably has embraced kind of scientific understanding much sooner. So if you look at singing teachers, even in the 1960s, they were starting to really engage in, okay, what's going on in there when we do these opera high notes, or when we belt, like what's moving, what's making what work, right? I would say from a spoken voice perspective, that's been less true. And really it's only been in 1990s, early 2000s where spoken voice has sort of engaged with that. Up until then, it's been much more kind of metaphor-based, imagery-based, kind of feeling-based, which isn't bad, just for the record, it's just kind of describing it, right? And so there's been these kind of like pendulum swings, I think, within the field. So what's happened in the past 20 or so years, we've just gotten so much science and so much. We now have MRIs and we can just scope you with fiber optic cable. So scope means we stick a camera up your nose and look at your throat. And so we can do all these like really cool sciencey things. And so there's this huge pendulum swing to what has been called fact-based pedagogy. And it's a term that I have like loved to embrace. Well, I think what's been really interesting over the past couple of years is there's been a slight pendulum swing back to where now we're calling it, it's like science-based as opposed to fact-based, which is kind of semantics, but what that means is that it's not all about the science. And so science is good, but it doesn't necessarily help people in the moment when you're trying to work on things and find things. You can find this balance. I was just reading an article Monday. I was arguing to use the idea of science-based but pedagogy informed, which is really academic-y speech for it's good to know things, but make sure you can make it useful. Right. And so I think that's really important. Another thing I think that's really changing in the conversations around voice is the role of emotion and how emotion informs voice. And that's just kind of an ocean that we're really just kind of starting to explore. As a really simple example, you can call someone on the phone, say you call a parent, a sister, and they answer the phone and they say hello, and you know that they're having a bad day just by the one word hello. Our emotions really impact us in a really deep way that we're only sort of now trying to understand.
So much research still being done. So I want to talk about voice in the boardroom. Many of the professionals I work with, many of the women do ask me continually for advice on how to make their voices heard in a room full of male colleagues in the boardroom. And I just wonder what your response is to that, because that is something that's coming up again and again and again.
Sure. I'm going to start my answer by acknowledging that I'm a man. And so I'm happy to answer your question because it's something that comes up a lot with female clients. But I do think it's important and respectful to note that I can't ever really know that experience, right? So that said, what I hear from clients that have been successful and things that we've kind of worked through, there's a couple layers to it. I'll ask clients, what is the definition of assertiveness versus aggression where you work? How do you define those? Like in your workplace, how do you define them and how do the other people around you define them? What do you consider rude and do other people define that as assertive? Because I also think that changes culturally, like at really high levels and then at really kind of micro levels, like inside specific rooms. And it's being comfortable. What I don't advocate is changing who you are, but what I do think can be helpful is within what we feel is doable and respectful is being able to adjust to culture. And so you can't necessarily adjust to everything, and there are lines and it's really, really sticky, but that you might consider that rude, but is that just assertive in that room? You know what I mean? And so that's one possible path, right? So there's other paths to that. Another path that has been found useful is to find allies. So to form alliances in the boardroom. So one thing that I hear a lot is, a woman will have an idea and it won't necessarily be heard or applauded. And then that same idea will be spoken by a man 10 minutes later. And everyone's like, that's the best idea in the world. And people just want to like punch a wall. Right. So that's something that's been communicated to me that is a common experience. So I'm told. So one thought for that many of my clients have said have been useful is to find packs. And so to have someone else say, well, Melissa said that exact same thing 5 minutes ago. So I think we should go to Melissa and ask about that. So having like different kinds of tools and tactics. I think also another kind of helpful tool is what's called the frozen hand gesture. And you want to be careful with this one. Maybe not necessarily do it to a boss per se, but some people say to what can be really helpful is while you're talking, very gently hold your hand up. And you'll be really shocked at how people will interrupt you less because your hand is up. And then when you're done, you can remove it. And as I was saying, da 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 da, and sort of the outward gesture of I'm speaking and now I give permission, other people permission to speak. For some people, that's helpful.
I think with any of these gestures and physicalities that we bring in, it's about doing it so that it feels seamless. all right? Because we've all heard of the power pose, and that has its merits. Of course, we know the research is behind it with Amy Cuddy. But when Theresa May walks in and does the power pose and it's wooden, that was the point where I thought, I'm not entirely sure that the point of this is really understood. So it's about being open to these ideas and maybe trying a few things out and seeing what feels natural to you. Because if you're doing these things and it's unnatural, we are going to feel that, I think. What would your response be to that? And do you recommend the power pose?
So twofold, does it feel natural? So natural is a really complicated idea, I think, in speaking training, and particularly in business training, because I agree with you 100% that there are lines of like, listen, like that's just never going to feel natural on me, so I need to find other paths. So I think that's important. At the same time, I think that sometimes this is when having an outside eye can be really helpful. Sometimes things that don't feel natural really look and sound natural. And so it's about having a friend, colleague, coach who can kind of help you negotiate those things. And so, I think that's why it's sort of complicated in terms like specifically like from like a female perspective. And again, I'm a man answering your question, but it's about, having kind of different things you can explore that make you feel most supported, so that you can still feel yourself, but at the same time, perhaps being open to some flexibility, which I think is true of all business communication.
Yeah, and I think having, a circle of trust, right? Having a space that you can try things out and you're not going to worry about being laughed at. But you've also got a professional who can perhaps mirror something new and make it sound and feel natural and show you how to do that. I mean, that's certainly what we work a lot with our clients. I'm really interested again in cultural differences. Now, I've been lucky enough to live in America. I absolutely loved my time there, as you know, and I still love coming to America. I just love it so much, so many friends and colleagues. But I'm interested about the cultural differences. You've coached hundreds of professionals, both in the UK and the US. I'm interested to know what differences, if any, have you noticed in how people relate to their voices in each of those cultures? Top
Sure.
line.
Top line, yeah, because you don't want to speak for millions of people, right? So, but I would say at a really top line, kind of anecdotally in my career, when I'm with American groups of people, they tend to be a little bit more willing to kind of have a go at the big silly stuff in particular, or just like step up, have a go. I tend to see a few more hands raised a little more quickly. I think that's kind of a fair trend. And so
Whereas British people would just look at you and glare at
yeah,
you.
yeah. So you said that, not me, but I think it's a fair trend, right? But at the same time, I think that particularly when I think about like British clients, their responses tend to be a little bit more thoughtful and well said, quite frankly. And that's something I find with a lot of American clients is there's less filter, which is not always good. And so I think that's something to kind of play with and work on in business communication. I would also say people define assertiveness very differently across the pond, like what's considered rude and what's considered not rude, and so in a lot of American boardrooms, you know, saying opinion as fact is sometimes wanted, which is complicated, but I think is a true statement in terms like this is what's going to happen. Well, what's the research behind that? I'll get back to you on Tuesday. So, whereas I think that I see less of that in kind of British boardrooms. There's also kind of a funny way to play with prestige and resume, I think, with British and American audiences. So, in an American audience, you have to walk in and be like, "This is who I am. This is why I'm important, and this is why you should listen to me." And you have to unapologetically say it in almost those exact terms to an American like business or political room. Like, give them your 30-second resume, start at the highest, biggest, fanciest stuff, and just hit it hard. Whereas I find if I were to do that at the very top of a meeting with a bunch of people from the UK. Well, who does he think he
Yeah.
is? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And so
I do.
whereas in the American room, if you didn't do that, you'd be, well, why should I pay attention to this person? Who does he think he is that he doesn't even tell us what his resume is? So I think that's sort of a fun and fairly universal kind of American
Yeah,
British difference.
I would absolutely agree with that. And one thing I learned about myself when I moved to America was how cynical and judgmental the Brits are. And actually, as consumers in our advertising industry, we are known as cynical consumers,
Mm.
and it's so fascinating to me. I mean, I didn't really experience that harshness that American boardrooms can offer, but I have certainly been on the sidelines of it. Let's just put it that way. So fascinating to hear your views. We are so lucky that you've joined BRAVA as a master coach. Very excited about that. I want to know what excites you most about joining us here at BRAVA Business and the potential impact that it will have in both the UK and the US working together.
What I think is really exciting is this idea to create really bespoke solutions for people. So often when you talk about kind of business communication, there tends to be one size fits all, even though people don't say it that way or sell it that way. That very much can be the case. And what I know about Brava, it's about really meeting people where they are, finding out what their needs are, and creating kind of real world unique solutions. I think what's also important is you want to find a way to connect performance skills with real world problems. I think that is something that really separates Brava in terms of, all right, how do I take the skills of voice acting, the skills of acting, the skills of just kind of general performance, and how do I make that real and tangible and something that we can do tomorrow when you go back into the office?
I just love our chats and our catch ups. And, this partnership has come mostly from that, really, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
And I'm really excited and thrilled that you are joining Brava and we shall be working more together. So we're really thrilled to have you on board. I want to ask you if someone listening is curious about improving their vocal presence, but they haven't done anything yet and they're unsure where to start, what is the first step you would recommend?
I would say talk to people you trust. What are what are your needs as you perceive them, and what are the needs of people, or and what are your needs in terms of how other people perceive you? So there is a term in the US, I don't love it, but it's just what it's called talking up and talking down. So talking up is talking to the people that are your bosses, people that you report to. Talking down is to people that report to you. And so talk up and talk down, right? So how do my bosses perceive me? How do the people that report to me perceive me? Because you might be shocked by the difference between those two answers and then how you perceive yourself. So try to use a research term, triangulate.
I love that. Do you know what? I actually love that word.
You want to triangulate your needs. It's not just what you want, it's what other people perceive. And then I think it's really helpful to work with someone. I mean, certainly I'm a coach, so I encourage people to work with coaches. There really is a difference between how you feel and how you perceive your performance and how you're operating and what other people see. And so being able to have an outside point of view in terms of like what your needs are and in terms of how to address those can be really, really important.
Yeah, and it's so much about confidence and about working with someone to help them build their confidence. Ultimately, that's our aim in everything that we do here. Now, you have coached people at the very highest levels in the boardroom. What's one story that still gives you goosebumps when you think about the transformation someone made with their voice?
So I was working with a senior vice president of human resources for a company that probably most people listening have heard of. It was a really high level person. And they had been in the role for about 5 or 6 months, and I had a relationship with this company, so they called me in and said, would you work with this person? And within the first 10 minutes of our first chat, she started to cry. And it really took me like aback because you just kind of don't run into that a lot in sort of kind of business settings. And they were just so truthful and so vulnerable, which again, you don't necessarily see because of that level of it. And I'll never forget, she said, Rocky, no one likes me. She goes, I don't understand it. She goes, I've had just success at other companies. My husband likes me, my kids like me, but just I walk into the office on Monday and no one likes me here. I don't know what to do. And so over the next several months, we really took a deep dive into, all right, how is she presenting herself? What are the values and goals of the people around her? How can she connect with her voice and her body in ways to be in the boardroom, to be in meetings with the people that report to her, high level meetings. And we worked for a while, and she sent me a letter when it was all over, and I still have it in my desk. And she mentions how it was life-changing in terms of really feeling that she knows people, and she knows kind of the questions to ask. So one of the things that I say to people is a technique is knowing where to start and what to do when you get stuck. It's just anything. Basket weaving, voice acting, speaking for business. Do you know where to start, and do you know what to do when you get stuck? And so I still have that letter. She still sends me holiday, Christmas, e-cards, and it's one of my very favorite stories.
I think we are so privileged to do this for a job. And I say that really meaningfully, because when you get that response after you've worked with people, you really do think, well, at least I've made some difference, right? And it's interesting that you say you don't get that very often in a business setting, because I suppose I generally work mostly with women. I work with a lot of men too, but at C-suite sort of level, it's a lot of women in boardrooms that I work with. And I find that we get very deep very quickly. So it's interesting, and how lovely when you get someone that writes a letter to you and still keeps in contact with you, and what an impact you've made on that person's life. My answer to that is everyone needs a Rocky on their shoulder.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
So we're going to wrap up now with just one final question. You know that this conversation could go on for another 4 hours because we've done it before, but I want to know what keeps you connected to voice work after so many years and so many different clients.
One of the things that keeps me coming back to voice is that it is infinitely dynamic. If you're holding on to a balloon, okay, and you poke one part of the balloon, you don't just touch that one part of the balloon, everything moves. So it's so complicated and you can't really isolate. Everything's connected. And that's how the voice is. It's so infinitely dynamic and complex. The science around it is always changing, and the people that you meet are always changing, and the culture that you work in is always changing. So it's this fascinating, beautiful mess. It's this beautiful mess of human beings and science and culture and people, and how do you bring order and positive change kind of out of all that just beautiful mess. It's infinitely interesting, and I've been delighted to devote my professional life to it.
All about expression. Rocky, it's always such a pleasure to spend time talking with you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to High Notes, a podcast on the art and business of voice. Thanks for joining us on this episode of High Notes. Check out the episode description below for more information. And to find out more about our work at BRAVA and get info and tips, subscribe to our newsletter. The link is also below. Join us next time for more insights into the world of voice.